Hey everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Manny Tejeda. I'm a sales and support specialist at Foto. Today we will be having a presentation with Suche from Sony. He's our technical rep. All right. First of all, let me start by thanking everyone for joining us today. It's heartening to know that more curious minds joined us today since we postponed the webinar. This week has been tough for all of us, and we prefer to respect the voices out there fighting for equality. With that being said, let us start. So we have a format for this. Please ask all questions in the question and answer or Q&A portal so that either myself or the awesome crew at Sony can answer during the presentation, or Gene can answer live once it is done. We'll be using the chat function for the sending links and relevant information. Gene Suche will be presenting. And I always have a tough time pronouncing your last name.
That's awesome. I've never heard that. This is so funny. I was like, when you're making that introduction, I felt like it was at church. It was like, let us begin. For those who gathered here to rock. Yeah, no, it's actually Suche. And I was actually going to say the same thing about your last name. I was like, I did not. I always say it's like Manny Tejeda. Like, I just didn't know that. So thank you for clearing that up. But yeah, it's Suche, but Suche, I think that's probably the best. And that's probably the nicest way I think I've ever heard anyone put it. So I really appreciate you doing that. So thank you. Thank you for having me on.
No problem. And we also have Walton, our Sony Account Manager. She'll be answering questions in the chat and Q&A, as well as I will be as well. So let me introduce Gene. Gene is an award-winning videographer with a concentration in the professional sports industry. His work has been featured in arenas, stadiums all over the country, HBO, NBC, and multiple online outlets. He has worked with some of the most celebrated and polarizing figures in the world of sports, entertainment, and politics. And without further ado, Dean.
Man, thanks a lot for having me on. It's so great to be here. For a lot of us out there right now, and not just at Sony, but any of the other at manufacturers and in the industry, seeing what's happened over the past few months, it's really nice to be with you again. I mean, I honestly, we're used to seeing on a weekly basis, Manny, and a lot of the consumers out there. And right now it's certainly a difficult time, but it's also interesting to see what type of content creation is going on, not just in the field of photography, but in video. And I'd like to also echo on behalf of myself and my family, all of the heartwarming wishes we're wishing for everyone out there in the country, not just with this pandemic, the families of George Floyd and everyone else that's been affected by racism and just civil injustice for years and years. So I'm a proud father of two young children of color, and my wife is a proud woman of color. And I'd be doing myself and my family a disservice if I didn't mention that. So thank you. And on to that, let's start talking about some video. I'm excited because the Foto audience is such an amazing group of people. I think I've never run into more of an eclectic group of photographers and creatives that inhabit, up there in Lower Manhattan or Chelsea, whatever area you call it. But it's amazing. I can't wait to get back in there. And I think, Manny, because I really don't want to forget this, is that you guys are opening back up for curbside, right?
Yes.
I got 2 emails from Sony today reminding me of that. They're like, and everyone's like, this is great news. So do you want to, I didn't get to read the whole thing.
I was going to wait till the end of the presentation, but why not? Foto will finally be opening for curbside and in-store pickup starting this Monday, June 8th, as part of New York State's Phase 1 reopening protocol. Our web store has also been reopened. Thank you for everyone who has stuck with us and helped us make it to the other side. All right.
Great.
And that includes sales and rentals. Okay.
Cool. Before I forget, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen right now. Which has got my information, also has my Instagram tag, because God knows I need all the followers I can get. But just a brief history. I was brought in, it looks like I've been a part of the Sony team, I think almost between 4 and 5 years now. According to my LinkedIn, as of last night, it was about 5 years. So I'm feeling old. My background relies heavily in sports production. I was a photographer back in high school and college, and really honed my talent skills in dark rooms. But after that, I got into professional sports. Started in minor league hockey in Cincinnati, moved my way to Memphis, and I was running and designing arena shows, and then moved on to gala events, college, and professional sports. And then I came up here with the NHL to run the New Jersey Devils show for a couple of years. And from there, really made some great contacts and started doing some stuff with the Jets, and then Madison Square Garden, and then a lot of stuff at Prudential Center. And just honestly, it grew into a little bit of a nice little freelance niche for me. And ever since then, I've been dipping my toes into all sorts of things. So not just video projects, but still projects and applications, as well as editorial photojournalism. I do a lot of still imaging for European markets. Mm-hmm. Der Spiegel, they pick on me quite a bit, so I love those guys. And in Germany, even though I'm Hungarian, but go figure. So Sony really took an interest in the fact that I had the ability to kind of talk in both spheres. So it's almost like becoming occupationally bipolar a little bit, because photography and video production certainly have a little bit of a different niche. They are both for creative expression and so forth, but obviously photographers tend to work more on their own, whereas videographers tend to be either, and you can attest this yourself, yes. You're a one-man band, and I think that's what, go ahead.
Yeah, you usually work, like video is usually a team effort, but lately client budgets and situations require you to do sound, video, technical, all in one person.
And right. I mean, yeah. So color grading, and it's like, oh well, and not just that, but people have time now on their hands. Yeah. They're like, oh, maybe I can learn a new skill set today. So you have everyone, your Joe Schmo vlogger, and then they're like, well, I want to start learning about S-Log and raw file, color grading, all these big files and editing, and then it's just basically basic assembly and then post production. And I think that's opened a whole new door skill set. And I think up until a few weeks ago, up until the last week mainly, it was isolated indoors. And now everyone's like, okay, let's put these skills to use, because of all the horrible events that have happened in the past week that have led to certain levels of protests, and then just basically getting this stuff out there, because social media and just the media in general is just flooded with content right now. And it's all from independent users. So I think that's where things kind of start to the tipping point, and that we can do, the launch pad. And I think a lot of that starts to occur, when people really talk about the recording, how you record, because the flexibility of footage, not like, I think photography, coming from photography, photo files definitely have a little bit more flexibility than video. And I mean, Manny, you basically, obviously being the key video guy over at PhotoCare, and I'm sure you get hammered with a lot of this. And I don't know what type of response you normally get, so I'd love to hear about what people are saying and how you think the proper response is. Why do I shoot 4K? How do I shoot?
Yeah, my response is usually, what does the client require? Where's it going to be delivered? And if you're shooting in 1080, 4K, the only reason it'll give you is if you downscale, it'll give you a sharper image, and you can crop and post. But make sure you have plenty of hard drives.
Yeah. I think that's definitely the key. It's like going from 35 millimeter to medium format. It's like, yes. Whoa, 125 megabyte raw files, or an A7R4 file, for example. I mean, it certainly is, all of these cameras and everything should just come loaded with drives. And speed is also an issue, of course, bit rate being what it is. So just talking about things, certainly when I came into the field back in the early 2000s, we were still using an SD, a standard definition application of DV cam, beta cam, all the good stuff back in the day, where you basically have to have decks and you have to ingest things and then digitize, what was called digitizing footage. And then, you'd be able to pick, okay, well, everyone was working in ProRes, which is, a 10-bit application. So when we're talking about, and I'm jumping ahead of myself a little bit here, because I think that most of the cameras that we offer from a Sony standpoint on an ILC, because the sensors are so big, we offer everything.
Let me roll that back. ILC, interchangeable lens camera.
Yep, interchangeable lens camera, or DSLR, digital single lens reflex, blah blah blah. So, well, yeah, ILC. So when I use that term, it's really going to be talking about our mirrorless systems, because you're also coming from a camcorder, what was historically a big camcorder environment. So, which meant fixed lens, not a lot of wide aperture. It was more run and gun, and depth of field was something that you only wish you could have.
Yeah, you would need an
So I
adapter
was,
back in the day.
yeah, well, it's not just that. And I don't know what your first tape cam was, but I mean, I was using the PD-150, the DVX-100 Panasonic 1A and 1B, as well as betaing the Panasonic HVX series, which was one of the first cameras to use what's known as P2 technology, which kind of leads to where we are today, being hard drives. So just totally digital. But of course, back in the day there, you'd have to buy like a 4 GB drive at about $400 a pop. And but you always wanted to find that cinematic look that you could never achieve. It's still to create a narrative. You would be limited to these sterile environments. So what would you do in post-production? Okay, you could deinterlace the footage to make it look a little quote unquote film-like or cinematic, or you could kick the contrast, whatever, just to do these little sprinkles in post-production. Or what we would do is we would buy wide-angle anamorphic lenses, and screw on the top, those big, doormat type of lenses. And it just, it didn't have the effect. So if you really want the proper analogy, like, and I'm going to take it back to sports, is like, okay, if you're watching an NFL game and you get a sideline cam, the typical thing of what you see in, from a TV broadcast versus like NFL films, that depth of field, that shallow depth of field, the slow motion, everything. I mean, snow falling, really soft and slowly, making everything, honestly, for lack of a better term, just really looking sexy. And so that's what I use that pretty loosely with that, because it makes its drama. You put the music to it, it just kicks. Yeah. So of course, when I was doing a lot of my BTS or doing my sizzle reels for hockey or Jumbotron stuff, I would want to use the highest frame rate I could. At the time, it was about 30 frames on some of those cameras, unless I wanted to, pretty much rent, a Red or something like that for thousands of dollars a day, just to get those one single tiny isolated shots that made it look like, you could be doing big screen stuff. But a lot of that, started back in the SD, and then obviously the Canon 5D kind of blew the doors off of everything when Vince LaForêt came in and just made his Reverie film, which you can now see online, but which is now very antiquated to what can be done today in a modern application. But that was all stuff in what's known as HD. So HD is still a very wide deliverable application. Most news networks still deliver in 720 or 1080. 4K still isn't an architecture that from a household to household period can be delivered seamlessly. It's all packeted and compressed. But what is 4K? So up to a few years ago, it was a buzzword, really. And, and when, I think, Manny, you hit on the head. It's like, okay, hard drives. I did a feature. I was shooting a feature a couple months ago that probably won't be done for the next 3 or 4 years, because it's a documentary, and every single frame was shot in 4K. And when we talk about size, from a 4K standpoint, that was 1 terabyte of footage for the day just on my camera. So it's heavy. It's a heavy time, but basically, in essence, it's twice the size of high definition. So when you talk about TV resolution, it's about 3840 by 2160. That's the size of the canvas you're looking at, which is known as 4K UHD. Now, big screen size is true 4K, which is 4096 by 2160. So it's a little bit more of a bigger palette. But Sony deliver, outside, internally, we deliver 8-bit 4K. And we're some of the only cameras that will deliver full frame 4K. And this is all in an 8-bit application. So what that means is you have 256 shades of red, green, and blue on the inside, whereas you have a nice little HDMI port, and you have little tools on the outboard, which I'll talk about in a little bit, where you can deliver in 10-bit, which is over 1,000 different shades of red, green, and blue. Manny, you want to add anything to that one? Kind of. Yeah, I just took a long sentence there, so I'm like, oh.
But remember, people, resolution isn't everything. There may be, you can have, good 4K footage. The pixel pitch matters as well, but good 4K footage, you can have great 1080p footage depending on the quality of the file. So keep that in mind for later on.
Absolutely. You know what? I can't say that clear. In fact, I'm not going to name any names here, but much like with Photo Care, we go around and we do a lot of shows. And so a lot of people like to put their cameras up against ours. I mean, Sony is the leading sensor manufacturer. We know what we're doing. Obviously, there's so many great cameras out there. If you have a camera that isn't getting really great pictures or anything, it's not the camera's fault. But there is something to be said about the quality of the pixels. and there are some cameras that just do not have great quality of pixels that can be stretched really thin when you try to, especially with a 4K application. And that's also really important to notice because you need the flexibility, and that's all, leads back to the dynamic range, which I'm going to explain here in a little bit, because I know some of you, I do not want to leave many of you in the reeds here. So, and I know Manny doesn't either. So we want to reel you back in, and instead of just doing a lot of this tech talk,
yes,
having some type of real life stories to go behind these to explain the true application. Now, why would you shoot in 4K? Future proofing, certainly one, which I just went over in my last example. And then Manny just said with cropping, because obviously even right now, what I'm doing right now is if, and I'll show a picture of my rig here soon, but when you see me, I'm actually shooting with an Aps-C lens on my full frame A7R3 right now, just to see. I wanted to try it out. I've been trying a different lens out, everything, the only real reason is because I want to find the lens that makes me look the slimmest. So I'm trying to take a vote on that, but it certainly is cropping. I'm not shooting a full frame because honestly, if I did have a full frame lens on here. I had the 20-1.8G and it was showing all of the mess that is surrounding here. So I've tried to carve out a nice clean area that I can show everything from. But at the same time, it leads to that. Now, with certain landscape shots and B-roll shots, I think that 4K full frame does lend itself well. Some really close depth of field stuff. I mean, it's depending on what you want it to do. But obviously also the flexibility of a shot selection. So if I'm shooting in 4K and I can crop that frame, remember you're looking, and if you're gonna do a 1080 application, you have a canvas that's twice the size of what you're normally working with. So in production, post-production, you can actually use, and one example of this is that if you look at my YouTube channel, and it's just my name, Gene Everett Suche. I'm going to say Suche here just because I like the word. I think I'm going to say it the rest of the day. But that's my YouTube channel. I've had tips and trick on memory recall, and there's some of the shots that are in there are B-roll shots of like one of our cameras, and it's just basically gliding along it, kind of making it almost like a car commercial where you're just looking at the lines. All of that was one static shot. And the only thing I did, because honestly, I couldn't move the camera because I was actually using a light above, a rotolight above the camera to kind of do a light sweep to make it look like everything was moving. And then in post-production, what I did was I just keyframed. And what that means is taking that canvas and then using a 1080 square and just moving right alongside of it and zooming and panning so that it makes it look like it's moving. So it's really simple. And there's a lot of companies out there. That's nothing real secret. I mean, that may be a little bit elementary or advanced for some people, but it does work. And Manny, I'm sure you're no stranger to it. But exporting that as a 1080 as a 1080 clip, because that's certainly what my clip is uploaded as, works wonders. Does that, Manny? Do you think everyone understood that a little bit?
Yeah,
or maybe,
I think that was
okay. All right. But take a look at that clip and subscribe to my channel. See, I'm shameless self-promotion for me. All right, so let's go on here. So why shoot 4K? You can definitely see the differences. And this is actually an antiquated frame. The full HD clip is actually from, I think, an old FS100. And then the 4K Ultra HD was shot on F55. So there is some nurturing there as far as the color depth and bitrate ratio, because you're looking at the contrast lines and symmetry and just how rich and their grains, their fine details that you just can't see outside of what you can do with these. And obviously, I think everybody kind of has a 4K TV or a 4K accessibility or seen it. I remember when I first saw my first bit of 4K footage, I was pretty blown away. But obviously now it's just, I'm sure the same thing happened when high definition. I saw like the first Star Wars movie in HD or something. I was like, whoa, So we deal with, with HD and 4K, they're different sources of compression. And on all of our cameras, the ILCs, the cinema cameras, a lot of these guys do include it. Even the DSC, the RX line. So when we talk about it's the little handheld cams, because obviously you can do 4K application pretty much out of everything nowadays. And so the RX100 and RX10s, all those cameras, and they do it very, very well. And you'll see that in the new ZL1 vlogging camera we're about to come out with. Excuse me. But for any of you audiophiles out there, when you look at compression, because everyone's asking about, okay, you know, bit rate and everything like that, it can be illustrated here in AVC versus XAVC, because XAVC is a native Sony codec that basically, you know, will stack that image sensor and pretty much put out the best quality footage it can. It's layering everything. It's not development. It's not incorporating any type of artificial artifacts that AVC HD will tend to do, because AVC HD is a base form. So it's not really meant for broadcast quality at all. It's very minimal. But it could be like where you're talking about an MP3 versus what's known as a FLAC file, which is a lossless form of codec. So MP3 being compressed, FLAC being uncompressed. So you can see individual ripples in water. You can see sky, the clouds. A good clip that we used to show with Sony was fire burning. So you would see, you know, it was actually with the A7S2, and when that first came out, showing the low light sensitivity, but you could look at the little granules of flame, like little coals and charcoal as sparks flying off of it, and everything is so individualized. Whereas on a sensor, like with AVC HD, if it's a scene and it's recognizing certain aspects and objects that aren't moving or just they have the same colors generally, it reads it and it manufactures it, and it just kind of spits it out like a computer. It doesn't really take into consideration the individual movements, so it doesn't look as authentic. And that's, yep.
Can I add a little, just for the photographers in the group?
Please do.
Think of it as saying, if you're shooting a RAW file, like a raw stills file, the different levels of compression via JPEG. If you go into Photoshop, and that's your JPEG quality slider, think of it that way.
Right. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Going 1 through 10. So you're looking at 1, you know, almost. So absolutely. So when we're talking about dynamic range, which Sony tends to talk about a lot, I think if that's one common thread through every class I teach, whether it be in photography or videography, dynamic range. And what is it? And you're looking at it, you're basically looking at all of the different shades of blue, of gray, gray, white tonalities, white to black, every single thing. And so what happens is that gives you a little bit of safety net on that sensor, and a level to play with. Stops, you know, where, you know, in video, and honestly, it's very hard. And what I'm getting at with the dynamic range is going to be the inevitability of S-log. Because backing up what I said earlier, as far as video is not near as forgiving as stills. It's much easier to screw up a video file than it is a still file.
Yes.
And then that's why our cameras have started off featuring what's known as S-log. And, you know, where does grain live? I mean, where does it live? It lives in the shadows. So when you're clipping highlights and everything, and you're obviously your blacks are killing it all over the place, you try to raise those and try to find any shade or shadow or any sliver of detail in those shadows, and you've lost it in video, it is gone. I mean, it's better off to leave it there than try to do anything else, because as soon as you try to lift it, unlike when you're trying to use a raw editor in Photoshop or Capture One or even Sony's Imaging Edge, you're going to lose it. It's not going to be happening. You're going to lose everything else. So there's a little bit of a tighter scale. Now, what the dynamic range in our cameras, especially like the A7S2 and beyond, does is it gives you a little bit more of like a stop or stop and a half latitude to screw up. You know, I guess for about lack of a better term. And especially when you're using something like S-log. And you know, when we talk about S-log, actually, I thought, man, this is what happens when I'm sharing my screen on Zoom and I don't have my navigator off to the side. So I was like, I think I have picture profiles coming out here soon, but I must have misplaced that sign. But back to really what I was going to say before we get to latitude, because again, this is kind of exactly what we're getting at with dynamic range. It's the exposure flexibility of your captured image. Go ahead.
We actually have a good one can you talk about the record settings such as 24p 60m? Because I think that hasn't been really gone over by Sony, like in the menu system.
Yeah, I actually have that down here. Hold on one second. I'm going to have some fun here. Give me a second.
Sure.
I'm using my nice little MacBook Pro here, and I'm like, oh, is this what it is? No, that's not it. Hold on. Is this it? Okay, yeah. Okay, so here we go. Okay.
This goes back to compression.
Oh, okay. Well, when you're talking about it, like 30p versus 50 megabyte, what is that? That's 30 frames progressive. That's a 30 frame progressive frame at about 50 megabytes per second. So, and a lot of that will depend on exactly what type of cards and media you're using, as far as how well some of that works, because it slows down. But the higher the bit rate, the better the quality of footage. Okay, I mean that's really the easiest way to really put it out there. So the higher, I always default. I don't. I mean, honestly, I have a lot of cards. I have a lot of media, and actually I'm going to get to this because I don't really use a lot of internal media, but I always try to use the highest bit rate possible because that's what's feeding through the processor and running to the card. And that's going to be the highest quality that you can possibly get without losing any type of liberties on your footage. And it especially shows up in what? High contrast areas or low light situations. On a daylight situation, you can run it at wherever and it probably won't see a lot. But when you deal in situations where there's a lot of blacks cranked, a lot of shadows, a lot in your lower register, that's where you're going to start to see these uh-oh moments. The other way in the high end is going to be clouds. Clouds is also a very good one where if you use a lower bit rate, it's gonna start to kick out, and especially the higher ISOs. So if you're, and again, we're talking about the same type of philosophy, using in photography, whereas if your baseline ISO is 100, versus S-logs, which can be in some cases 400 to 800, or even above that, depending on the size of your sensor, it's going to definitely deliver different results. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. What other? Is there any other questions out there? I see this Q&A box and it says.
Don't worry about that. I'll take care of that.
Okay. Well, I'm just like if anyone's anything's addressed, I think it's.
Yeah, we have more complicated questions that we'll answer it towards the end of the presentation.
Okay. Cool.
But just in case anyone's wondering, so file format XAVCS, that's your compression in HD. The record setting is 30 frames per second and 50 megabits per second. That's what that means.
Correct. And like you see out there, and of course, with the file format, you have the AVC HD codec, which is basically our lowest, that is your quote unquote JPEG. That's your base JPEG. And then obviously you've got XAVCS HD, and then you have XAVCS 4K. So, and you're going to see your frame rates change considerably. In the high definition range, obviously, you're going to be able to kick it up to almost 120 frames per second. In 4K, you're going to be limited to 30 frames progressive per second, so that's as far as high as you can go in our systems. And when we look at that, they're like, well, why can't I do 120? Well, a lot of it's a heat issue, so you have to have and that's a reason that, okay, well, my F55, which costs, $35,000-$40,000, can do, 60p, or whatever.
They have built-in fans and
yeah, you got built-in fans, exactly. And Manny, I don't know if you're around. I'm anxious. I want to hear this. When the first internal, do you know what the first internal 4K camera was? I think along the line. I think it was the Canon 1DC. And it advertised, it was like a 1DX on steroids in the video style. And it had a custom exhaust fan built in to blow air across the sensor. And it used a motion JPEG codec.
Which is almost impossible to edit.
Yes, horrible. It's horrible. It's horrible. And I have nothing against, because I used to shoot Canon Cine and they're great cameras in their own right, whatever. But again, but it's a true testament. Like if you saw the exhaust system and what they were using to blow air across that sensor, because you're talking kicking up those frame rates like that at a full frame standpoint, it's getting to a point where it is going to be accessible. But a couple of years ago, it really wasn't. You'd be able to fry an egg across that sensor. So within under a minute, your camera would just start smoking. So I think that's certainly growing pains other kind of companies kind of have been going around with, as far as is using this 4K, really getting into the 4K game.
Now, a really good question. Is there a huge difference between 24p 60M to 30p 100M?
Absolutely.
Clear about that.
Absolutely. And we can even, and when you talk about it, honestly, if I'm going to use an analogy like this right now, when you're talking about 24p, you are skipping frames. So it's not really seamless. When you go into more 30p is almost like single shot old sitcom stuff,
Or the new.
Whereas 24p, that's what we used for we wanted it to look like 20. That's cinema. is 24. So it is a different shooting style. Definitely one thing, like when you're trying to trick, for example, a lot of print films nowadays, if they are trying to get better movement and better, more detail, they will shoot in 30p, and then they will deliver in a 24p. They will export it as 24p. Just like for slow and quick motion, or if you're trying to do time-lapse stuff, you're going to have to do it in a different level and pretty much shoot a piece. Or like if you were breaking glass, for example, and you want to see all the shards shatter all over the place, or if you want to slow things down and I'm going to shoot it at 60 or 120. But obviously when the main part of your film is going to be 24p, you're going to have to export it, because once you get onto a timeline in post-production, which obviously we're really not going to get into now, it's not going to play well with other formats unless everything is pretty much uniform across the board. So certainly you're going to want to, 24p and 30p are different. And 24p and 30p, that's been around. I mean, those were the only options we really had back in some of the SD days, the pro cam stuff. Yes. So, I mean, 60p was a pipe dream, so that is a really good question though. I mean, I think and it's important to illustrate, but again, you're basically, if you're like looking at old single cam, just single, like Three's Company stuff or something like that, that's all shot in, 30, and then, just your Godfather, it's 24. So stuff like that. Does that make sense? You think? Is that the analogy there?
So let's go back to log.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, before that, do you think we should talk about Rec 709 or not?
Sure.
that was a slide pause. Well, I tell you what. Basically, I'm going to give you the short answer. Rec 709 is basically the uniform color structure that every network and the United Nations designate as CAMET. So if you're watching Seinfeld in America, old reruns of Seinfeld, it's going to look exactly the same over in Japan. So you're not using any type of thing different. So colors, because obviously when you're dealing with video, you're dealing with monitors. You're dealing with different types of color gamuts. So Rec 709, that's what it's all about. All right, camera setups for Sony. Let's go into that with the IOC. You do have incorporated it, and this is one thing that I'm going to tell you all out there that are Sony users that are trying to set up your Sony camera for video. Please immediately go into your menu system and change it. I mean, where's that slide again? Okay, I don't know. Hold on a second. Change it off of your exposure mode, which is camera. In the newer systems, it's camera menu 2. It's that first thing. It's going to be defaulting to program mode. So for those of you that are very familiar on the still side, program mode basically lets the camera take control. Shutter speed doesn't work like that in video, y'all. It just doesn't. So in shutter speed, basically, okay, Manny, help me out here. What is the reciprocating factor of shutter speed for video?
So let's say if you're shooting double. So 24p, you're shooting the closest approximation to 1/48.
Or 150, yep.
30 frames per second, 1/60. 60p, 1/120. This is something I go over constantly at the store.
Yes, I'm sure you do. So why not just do it one more time then, right?
If you want your video to look natural and does not have a strange judder effect, you want natural motion blur, you want it to be double the factor.
Exactly. Like, oh my gosh, I'm dealing with rolling shutter over and over. Well, a lot of that can be corrected with a correct shutter speed, people.
Yes.
So when you're shooting, but program mode in our cameras, or in any camera, it just doesn't recognize how to okay? So that's one thing that as soon as I get my cameras and unbox them, I turn that little top dial on that says to the film strip. And I like to use the film strip. You should always use the film strip. Do not use the still settings, because even then it can be tricked a little bit. And then change it to manual mode. I'm just telling you, I mean, you can use aperture mode. I mean, shutter speed, do whatever you want. But I'm telling you, I'm not going to be held responsible. So using that mentality, I mean, that's where you're going to be able to be like, well, wait a minute. What if I'm shooting at, or if I'm shooting at S-Log, ISO 400 in broad daylight, and my shutter speeded at 60. What do you think? What aperture? And I want to shoot at f2. What do I have to do, Manny?
ND filter.
Thank you. Honestly, and the reason I'm saying this, and I have to tell you this, because I love talk, I love communication. It's much more fun to be jabbering with people than just talking to myself. Yes, ND filters. So, and I'm sure you get that all the time too. So I want
So
some more right now.
when
So yes,
when you're
ND
shooting stills
filters.
versus video, you have considerations. You can, like, if you're shooting in log, your base ISO is commanded by whatever the camera is set to. So if your base ISO is 1600 ISO, it seems a little high for video, but it's actually better than it is for stills. The camera can handle that noise level. But if you want to shoot at f2 outside and your shutter speed's at 20, at 1/48 or 1/50, you have too much light coming in. So you have to stop the light coming into the camera.
Exactly. Exactly. And not just for, film, but you get some weird looks, man. Some weird flares depending on your lenses. And that's important. I don't have a slide built for that, so I'm going to go ahead and say that right now. In regards to the lenses, our new G series lenses and G Master lenses are coded for future proofing against 8K cameras and beyond. I mean, whereas the average lens, like your average, it'd be coded about 30 lines of resolution per millimeter, ours are coded around 60. So that's something that obviously you need to take into consideration, especially if you like nice little lighting effects like flares and, everyone's like an anamorphic and stuff like that. But doing some cool stuff, and for future proofing, our G Master lenses are top of the line.
Yeah.
So I just want to say that because I know I'll forget about it. This is also a little a public service announcement right now for firmware. That's for firmware. Firmware in our cameras is not like any other system. It basically rewrites the CPU, gives options, activates face detection points, eye autofocusing, and animals and dogs, all that fun stuff. So really be cognizant of your camera, because 9 times out of 10, when people come to me, or probably Manny, you too, anybody else at the store, Tommy, Ron, everybody, Jeff, it's just you're always going to have questions like this. And odds 9 out of 10, if your firmware isn't up to date, that's going to be a 30-minute block of time that's going to be blocked off, because we're going to have to wait to see if that's going to cause or solve your issue.
Yeah.
So please, please make sure that your firmware is up to date. We have charts for our firmware rollouts, what's going on with them, what it entails, and it's really worthwhile. So I mean, really nurturing your camera, to the best of every use that you can get out of it. And so
we offer that service to upgrade your firmware at Photocare for Sony cameras, because we have to charge for it, because it takes about 30 minutes. And sometimes, sometimes your camera doesn't like it, and then we have to redo it a few times.
It's really interesting. We've been doing a few of those, and people do come because you do get kind of afraid, like, oh my God, it's taking so long. But it's worth it. And these are kind of a rollout of what the type of things that have already come out, and like why it's important to kind of pay attention to it.
On a side note with that, I will say that 90% of the time when your camera is refusing to update, it's usually the cable.
Yeah,
not all USB cables are made to transfer data. So a lot of them are only for charging. It's hard to tell the difference. This is why I always do it with something like a tether tools cable, because that's definitely for data.
Right. So I know that we're 20 minutes out here, so I want to simply really kind of glaze over, because, and when I say glaze, I say that knowingly because a lot of people just start to lose, like, what are you talking about? Especially because it really, S-Log and picture profiles are the deep dive into the system and everything that it can do, because 9 times out of 10, I'm telling you, from an independent filmmaker standpoint, using a standard picture profile is perfectly appropriate for what you do. I am a lazy person. If you have been listening very closely for the past 40 minutes or so, you may have noticed that I have 2 young children that are running crazy out on my door. And even, we just can't control them, and you're stepping on top of each other. So if you think that I'm going to sit around and start doing a lot of stuff in S-Log, you got to think how, and I do not have time to do that. On film projects, when I'm using multicam stuff, I certainly will use S-Log. But this chart here kind of illustrates, and this is straight from Sony's website. So anybody that comes to my way, please explain the different picture profiles, because basically if you accidentally stumble upon that menu in our camera system, you're going to be like, what in the world? 1, 2, 3. It just gives you numbers right and left. Well, this is kind of an example of the different hypergammas that these log algorithms really use. Now, what we really want to focus on are 8, 9, and 10. So 8 and 9, or I'm sorry, 7, 8, 9. which basically is S-Log2 and S-Log3. And S-Log3 is really the closest thing that you can get to 18% natural gray. I mean, neutral. So basically, and that's exactly what it is. And when we talk about JPEGs versus RAW, it's giving you a very flat profile that says, hey, you need to grade me. You need to grade me. I mean, there's no other. The footage looks terrible. Like if you go on set, yeah, if you go on
highlights, just flat.
Yeah, nothing. But it gives you so much more details. That's where your dynamic range is just stretched. Like it's showing you the blueprint of everything that our sensor can do for your image. Now, one little nice tool that we do have inside of our cameras, hidden in the toolbox menu, which is on pretty much it's the last tab on all of our cameras, is called a gamma display assist. It was introduced in the A7S II, and basically going back to the slide I showed you on a Rec 709, it shows you what a Rec 709 profile slapped on top of that image without it actually being recorded will look like. So it's basically almost like an EVF. It's like an electronic viewfinder, image accurate of what the footage may look like. So if you're a DP on set and you're shooting an S-Log, you have to show something to a director, they're not going to screw up. They're going to be like, oh, you don't know what you're doing. Well, this is exactly what it's going to look like you're doing.
Someone had a question: is there a difference between setting S-Log and picture profile 1/2/3, etc.?
Well, that's exactly what this chart is, and absolutely, especially when you want the knee curve, when you really want to crank at those blacks or anything like that. Pictures 3 and 4. So pictures 3 and 4. So like a Rec 709 image off picture profile 3 in S-Log will give you some added contrast. Sony 3 actually is what Dateline, NBC, and CBS News, 60 Minutes they use on their A7S cameras. So we tweak it a little bit, but those are the ones that the news go to because it's the least amount of work that you need to do in a log algorithm for anybody and still get the images that you really want to get. So it's a little bit it's not as flat as S-Log3. And then obviously the new camera systems will have the Hyperlog Gamma, the HLG2, which is, high dynamic range. So it's almost like a high dynamic range log. So it's almost like S-Log3 with a LUT thrown on top of it, which is lookup table, which is like a Rec 709 image. But I don't recommend really diving into too deep of that because a lot of people will use picture profile 10 if they're just streaming right out to a high dynamic range television. In post-production, some of these applications like Premiere, they don't like to play with it too much. And a lot of people find out the hard way on that one. So that's one thing I kind of steer is like, if you're going to go into logs, stick to, a lot of people still prefer S-Log2. Yeah. Because that doesn't need near as much work as S-Log3 either. If you're not using a colorist or anything like that, I would steer away from S-Log3.
All right.
But if you want to print out that screen, go to Sony Alpha. Just look it up on Sony support.sony.com. And
this webinar will also be recorded, so it will be on YouTube later on tonight for watching purposes.
Yeah. So that's definitely one of the things that you want to take into consideration when you're recording and how you're recording it.
Someone's asking, where would I best set Cine 4? That's personal preference, honestly.
Yeah, I mean, it's exactly right. It's personal taste. It's not going to be, it's like, well, I'm not going to sit here and say and talk like, oh, what are the best settings for sports photography versus portrait photography? It's not like that. But again, it's like what type of image you're looking for, what type of environment are you shooting at night? Are you shooting in the morning? Are you shooting in the day, broad daylight? I mean, there are different certain factors there that you have to take into consideration. Now, I know certain people will just set their camera at Cine 4 and then go inside and tweak the knee curve and the blacks and really just go in there. And it's a total, because remember, even though you're setting it Cine 4, you have to go in and you have to microtonally adjust those tools to make sure that it's what you want to look like. I mean, it's a very distinctive voice.
What's next?
Gear. Let's do the gear, baby. All right, so all types of gear, and actually this is kind of something that I really want to talk about, especially for my application being at home. I've got so many cables and lights and things running around, like I've got a fan, I've got computers. I've really come to love and respect what's built into our cameras, this Mishu application. And we have certain individual microphones that are built for these tools that have preamps for XLR, so I can plug in a lav. Usually I do run a lav. I've been running a little bit low on batteries and didn't get to run out to Walgreens today. But now I get to go, but now I'm using, straight out, but I'm looking and I'm going to see if I have a picture. So this is a picture of my rig actually right now. So I have, I have a rubber band back down because my Mishu clip kind of fell off of my lavalier, which I've been abusing. And I have actually, I had the 18 to 110 Sony lens on there, but now I have the 16 to 70 Zeiss. But this is the A7R3 on my Gitzo pod, but that's pretty much exactly what I am looking at right now, sans the big lens. But again, it's totally cableless environment. I don't have a cable in there. I mean, everything, and plus it's battery powered, so I don't need to power my receivers through AA's or anything like that. I mean, it's at least on that, the transmitter I do, but the receiver I don't.
So
and
just to add to that, I would like to say that Sony's multi-interface shoe is actually very unique. Everyone wonders why certain like pocket wizards and stuff like that don't always work, properly, because they're not putting it on all of them. Because there's a set of pins in front of the shoe that actually communicate with all of this equipment.
Right.
Mm-hmm. No other manufacturer makes this. There's no cables that need to go in. It slides right in.
Slides right in. It's just, and plus, for flash accessories, all that other fun stuff. I mean, it's just another tool in your toolbox there with the Sony Alpha system, and it is proprietary, but it works so darn well for me. Mm-hmm. And plus, I also show I have my Magwell capture card. That's what is going into the camera from my camera into my laptop to give me a nice little 60p thing on this Zoom recording.
So a lot of people have been wondering, like, how do you use a mirrorless camera as your Zoom camera,
right?
Skype camera. You can either use a USB capture card.
Yep.
Which is honestly a little hard to get nowadays.
Is it? I was wondering about that. Is it
still hard?
I don't even know. I'm like, is it still? I was thinking about that because everyone was trying to look for all these interesting little loopholes on it. So which there are a few, but I mean, and I've actually was on.
Sony has a loophole.
Well, there is a loophole. It's using OBS and using Imaging Edge. So basically, Sony has a free proprietary software called Sony Image Edge, which you can get for free, which also is basically module-based. So you can edit, you can remote capture, and through that, you can actually remote connect your camera to the computer. And on some cases, like the A7R4, now you can do it wirelessly, and it works like a champ. And what people are doing is they're taking that feed and they are creating a window in OBS, I think. Is that right? The OBS software?
Open broadcasting software, which is free.
Well, that's free. That's free too. And I was doing it earlier. It's pretty cool. And basically creating your own box in there, and you can stream out there because you can stream right from OBS into YouTube and Facebook or whatever social media platform you desire. But it does work. It is not available on every single one of our cameras, but if you do have like an A7R4 or an A9 II, it will work. It does, and you know what? It doesn't really take that much effort. You have to turn on inside the camera, you have to turn on control or set a computer like that. And then using the remote module, you just pop it right in, have the window up, say hi, and then you'll go into this open broadcast source software. And on basically the way that works is that has what's called scenes. And you have a scene in it, just you have an option for window capture, much like I'm sharing my PowerPoint screen with you right now today. You'll be able to share that window and trim it and crop it down just so you're looking at it. Yep. So in a pinch, yes, it will work. Now, that being said, I'm sure that in the next couple months, you're going to see some newer applications on the horizon that even other manufacturers are looking at, where you're going to be able to turn your camera into a streaming powerhouse. Because obviously, what are we battling? We're battling phones. We're battling phones, pure and simple. So it's never-ending battle, and basically they're pushing us, we're pushing ourselves, and I think sooner than later you're going to see some really nice, surprising results with that.
Well, very well said. Let's move on.
Recording. I always use I have a Ninja 5, and this is not a Sony product. It's by Atmos, one of our partners, and it uses solid state drives. So I have like 2 1 terabyte drives that I can just run in, and basically this is what I use as my ProRes tool. This will record 10-bit. It's just such a valuable tool, especially when you're on set or anything like that, or with me, even with a lot of these Zoom things and everything, or if I'm recording myself, I can see myself. It's awesome, 4K, very thin. It just does a lot of great work.
Why would you prefer to record to an Atomos instead of a internally to 8-bit via your memory card.
Exactly. No, I mean that's exactly. I mean, an 8-bit in a pinch isn't bad, but for me, I'm a 10-bit. I'm a nut. I've been doing. I mean, I just love the flexibility and what you don't realize though with AVC HD compression being what it is that okay, yes, you have a smaller file. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean in video language that editing is going to be easier because it's constantly resampling and uncompressing. Whereas with ProRes, it's virtually, I mean, what you see is what you get, and there you go. So time is money for us as freelancers. You know that. You want ProRes. So therefore, there we go. Now, one of the other tools that I find, especially with my Sony system, is this NPA MQZ1K. And that is it's a Swiss Army knife of a tool for the cameras. Whether or not you're using the FZ100 batteries, which are amazing for the new 3 series, or if you're doing the MP50s for the older series, it's got a nice little slip that you can convert it. But basically, you can charge up to 4. It comes with 2 FZ100 batteries, but you can either charge, you can charge your phone, but you can also plug into the camera, which is what I'm doing right now because after a failed attempt earlier where I plugged the half charge, I plugged a half charge battery in, and I ended up, my first stream I did was over, I didn't realize it was going to be over 2 hours long. So I had to run out and switch batteries real quick. I wasn't using the one time I'm not using.
Of course.
And so basically you can power a camera for up to 2 days, but it's such a useful resource. I know a lot of people don't know about this charger and they're using other things, but this thing is awesome. It's a quick charger. You can charge 4 batteries really quick.
Yeah, it has quarter 20 taps, so you can actually screw it onto a rig.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Yeah, all those quarter 20s in there, man.
Yeah, if you're used to using V-mount batteries,
yeah,
this is a less expensive and easier way of doing this with Sony Mirrorless camera.
I think I'm going to use that. I'm going to steal that line because yeah, exactly right. So it works tremendously well. I think we just topped off. That's about all. I'd really like to see what questions we have to see if there's anything else to elaborate a little bit more on, because that's pretty much a nice snapshot of the video capabilities of our system.
I have an interesting question. I don't know how to really go about this one. Can you get a wide-angle lens for an infrared mirrorless camera, example 24mm fixed or zoom lens without hotspot problem? Sony.
Is this the same guy that has been haunting my Instagram? That's what I want to know.
They have an Alpha 6300 converted to IR. My current lens is 18 to 55. So I don't know the backstory on that one, but
sure. Well, no, then this is different. I think this is a different person. Well, people that follow me, I do a lot of infrared photography, and yes, I do have a quest for lenses that will work with. I have a full spectrum converted A7R. Now, I will tell you the best lens that I've ever used on infrared without any hotspot limitation is the Sony 55-1.8 Zeiss. However, there are the 24-70 f4Z, the original one, that has a really nice zoom range too. Basically what happens is, depending on how lenses are constructed and how light hits and goes through them, can generate hotspots in the middle of your image. And what that means is it almost looks like it's a dust particle, but it's really bright. Like your image just suddenly gets a little bit brighter and it gets really annoying. So yeah, I typically just travel with the 55-1.8, but the 24-70Z is really nice. I have been using the Sony 21.8, and that I have not put all through the paces, but I've been very, very happy with the results. If there are hotspots, which I have not, honestly, I haven't tested it the way I normally would, but I have not. I've been really just throwing images out there. I haven't seen any, but I'm sure there might be, but because I think full frame lenses definitely are more, likely to have, especially that big camera. It's the A6300. It may not be that big of an issue, but the A7R, it certainly, it shows up a little bit more. But stay tuned to my Instagram page. I'll definitely put out some results, and you can hit me up there too. It's Gene_Everett. But I also go with JC_infrared, and that's where else you can, from the infrared photography. I mean, it's a little bit different. I'm glad someone taught. I mean, I've been doing like all these different like streaming stuff, and no matter the subject, infrared has always come up. So someone absolutely is looking at my stuff.
All right. So from longtime photo care loyalist, Robin Schwartz.
Hey, what's up, buddy?
For a beginner, what is recommended to set my A9 for video?
Ooh, well, the good thing, okay, here's the good thing about the A9. The A9 focuses at 60 times per second, so you're going to get amazing autofocusing in there.
Yeah.
Secondly, it doesn't have S-Log, so you don't even have to worry about it. So picture profiles, don't even worry about it. Element, just really speaking, if I were you, and you're not worried about the 4K application, I would be shooting it at XAVCS HD. I would start at 30p. I would start, and I would put it in manual mode. So obviously you want to make sure that your shutter is at 60th of a second, and then see what you get from there. I mean, I think that a lot of the new run and gun stuff right nowadays, that's the way it's being shot. So
Yeah, I'm sure I'll see Robin at the store soon once we're fully reopened for phase 2.
yeah, well, I can't look. I really can't wait. I can't wait to see everybody again. I can't wait to get out of the house. I can't wait to. I don't know. I mean, it's see someone without a mask on in person would be pretty nice, you know, outside of my family. So
I think that's pretty awesome. Let's closing remarks. Gene, thank you so much. A lot of useful and valuable information there.
Thank you.
PhotoCare will be reopening for phase 1 on Monday through Friday, starting this Monday, June 8th, from 10 a.m. till 4 p.m. Okay, curbside and in-store pickup only. That also goes for rentals. All right. Next thing, we have an event, another webinar, another conversation with artists series. That's Thursday, June 11th. That is, we'll be interviewing award-winning director and photographer Gary Land. So we'll be putting up the information to sign up for that very soon. That will be up by hopefully the end of the day. And if anyone wants to rewatch this presentation and everything else that we've had for the past 3 months, please visit PhotoCare's YouTube channel. So if you go to photocare.com, there is a link to the video section. You click on that, it goes straight to our YouTube channel. I'll be posting that in our chat box as well, okay?
Great. Thank you so much to everyone for coming. I mean, this is really a lot of fun. Hopefully we get to elaborate a little bit more on some of these techniques to kind of keep growing the conversation, because obviously it's becoming more important for everybody's application, you know, even outside of still photography, and especially times like these when, you know, so it's making everyone a little bit more comfortable. But thank you so much. And I really can't wait to see you guys again soon.
Thanks, Gene. Thanks, Megan. And thank all of you for sticking with us to the past 3 months. And hopefully we'll have more of these sooner rather than later. And have a great weekend.
Great.
Take care.
See you. Take care.
Cheers.